Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here representing Jason Blaha Strength and Fitness, and today I want to chat with you guys and gals a little bit about carbophobia in the fitness world. But a quick reminder, if you guys will please click like down below, be greatly appreciated. If you are not subscribed or following, please do so, and if you'll be kind enough to drop me a comment down below, I would appreciate it so much. Thank you. All right, let's get over to the topic. Again, we see so much carbophobia, and I do think a lot of it stems from the fad diets. A lot of it stems from people using lower carbs in to cut water weight, who want to look a certain way. And I want to be clear. I obviously, you guys have seen me when I drop carbs down. I look leaner and tighter, obviously, when I cut carbs, but keep in mind that's an illusion. So before we even jump into that, be aware that is an illusion when anyone does it. And plenty of contest prep coaches for bodybuilders, including natural bodybuilders, still keep their people on 400 or 500 grams of carbs sometimes walking into a bodybuilding show, right? Walking into a bodybuilding show. And then they have them salt up and everything, and they still look shredded. And that's because they're really, really, really lean. And therefore, when you're lean enough, you don't have to fake looking leaner. But for everybody else, obviously, a lot of times you're going to look a couple percentages leaner if you're still carrying any significant amount of body fat. You know, usually definitely people at 10% or above, yeah, we all look leaner when we cut the carbs down, or at least a lot of us do, right? At the expense of fullness, but it doesn't matter because you look leaner. So there is that. And I think because of that, that also causes a lot of people, a lot of influencers and other people to kind of promote lower carbs because they know they look a little bit better when they do. But the reality is, from a fitness perspective, a body composition perspective, and a performance perspective, this just isn't warranted. And so I'm going to talk about all of those separately. Let's talk about each of them separately really briefly and why they're a problem. So let's talk just health and fitness. Okay, we need to be clear. Ultra high carbohydrate diets are absolutely linked with longevity, better health outcomes in general. And I've had people say, well, you know, the same could be said of unhealthy ultras. They also eat really high carbs. No, not as a percentage. You'd be surprised. So no, we don't eat mostly carbohydrates in the United States, right? So when I say this, I'm talking 60% or more of people's calories coming from carbohydrates. You look at all the healthiest cultures, all the longest lived cultures on earth, they all tend to actually have a higher amount of carbohydrates in their diet than they do dietary fat by a significant margin. And I'm talking usually ranging anywhere from 60 up to about 80% of their calories tend to come from carbohydrates, right? The 80% being closer to someone like Okinawans, Mediterranean diet being closer to 60% to 70% usually, but with, you know, decent amount of animal protein, decent amount of healthy fats in there. But all these things, you'll notice all these societies with the lowest rates of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, insulin, and obesity, they all eat predominantly carbohydrate diets by a very large margin. And what you actually see in the cultures that have the opposite, it is quite a bit lower still, okay? And there tends to be more processed carbohydrates as a chunk of that. But the problem is then processed carbohydrates, refined sugars, not because they're eating carbohydrates as a whole. We're talking generally rice, beans, grains, legumes, fruit, all this stuff. This is where you see these healthy cultures. And be clear, we need to be clear, that includes even white rice, because look at a lot of Asian cultures. So when we look at this in the epidemiology, it's very, very clear carbohydrates are not linked with these things. In fact, it's the opposite. It's literally the opposite. If you start scaling things like diabetes rates, obesity rates, and you look at percentage of the people's of culture's calories of carbohydrates, it's almost inversely proportionate. Okay, the higher the percentage of carbohydrate in their diet on average, the lower these things are. All right. So again, just in the basic statistics around the world, you see this reflected. High carb diets are healthy. And keep in mind, not all carbs are equal, just like not all fats are equal, not all proteins are equal. So context, because there are some bad carbohydrates doesn't mean carbohydrates are bad. That's like saying, because there are some bad fats, that all fats are bad. Or because there are some really crappy sources of incomplete protein, all protein is bad. Well, that's stupid. We don't do that. All right, so You have that. All right. What about performance? Pretty much unanimous. Yes, there can be a use for dietary fat in some endurance sports, but by and large, all top athletes around the world, high carbohydrate diets. Very, 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 and I mean very few exceptions. By and large, almost every sport on earth, I don't care if it's a strength sport or an endurance sport, I don't care if it's powerlifting, marathon, running, triathlons, football, right? Doesn't matter. Boxing, MMA, high carbohydrate diets dominate over and over and over. This has been studied, and we know even keto adapted athletes, if carbohydrates drop too low, even their run times and stuff suffer, their performance suffers. The people who can get away with it the most are actual low rep strength athletes. Okay, power lifters and Olympic lifters are probably the one sport that can get away with a little bit less if they need to. Okay, probably the only sport where anyone is actually successful on a really low carbohydrate diet, even though they do represent a much smaller demographic. Pretty much any other sport, high carbohydrates dominate. Again, it's been studied. Even in keto adapted athletes, they still need, even in fat adapted athletes, they still need substantial carbohydrates, even in endurance sports. Been shown over and over and over. It's the fuel of athletes. All right, same when it comes to body composition. We already look at all the health markers, and we know what the health markers too. Same with body composition. Leanest people on earth. Best body composition on earth. What does everyone think of as a bodybuilder pre-contest diet? We all know this. Everybody out there knows how is historically the most common pre-contest bodybuilding diet. Keep in mind, bodybuilders at contest time are literally the leanest demographic of humans on earth. Would anyone disagree with that? And at the very least, leanest relative to their muscle mass. So best body composition on the face of the earth. Pre-contest or contest time bodybuilders. What is the single most commonly used diet for this? We eat chicken and rice 6 times a day. High carbohydrate. High carbohydrate is literally been used for this over and over. The same when you look at all these other lean athletes, really lean people as a whole. As a large demographic, with some exceptions for keto people, but they're still a minority, a small one, high carbohydrate diets. They're used successfully by the leanest, most shredded, lowest body fat people on the earth all the time to reach those levels. All the time for decades. All right? So carbophobia, being involved in fitness at all, is absolutely ludicrous, and it has no place in the fitness world.